Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I formally declare open this council meeting of the Colac Otway Shire Council on the 24th of February 2021. Can I ask that you all please stand for the opening prayer? Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. Amen. I would like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. I would like to advise that all council meetings are audio recorded and live streamed, with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The audio recording of this afternoon's meeting will be placed on the website as soon as practicable. By participating in open council meetings, individuals consent to the use and disclosure of the information they share at the meeting, including any personal and/or sensitive information. Please note that it is an offence to make an unauthorised recording of the meeting. Can I ask that council staff record all those present today? I note there are nil absences. Now moving on to question time. The Colac Otway Shire encourages community input, and integral to this is the opportunity provided to ask questions at council meetings. A maximum of 30 minutes is allowed for question time. I'll start by indicating that I have received questions in writing from Mr James Judd, Mr Arthur Watson, Mr Prabha Kutty and Mr Nasser Cobb. Now I noticed that I think Mr Kutty is present, and Mr Judd. I don't think Mr Cobb is here, or Arthur Watson, I don't think he's here. Okay. Following that, I will then invite other questions from the community members present. Can I get an indication of whether... Oh, yes, we've got Mr Judd and we've done all that. Anyone who is not in attendance will not have their questions read out in accordance with Council's governance rules. Okay, we've got questions from Mr James Judd. Well prior to 30th of June 2021, will the Colac Otway Shire Council make clear to all in the garbage collection areas, not just put in on the web, what is in a glass container, so it must be put in the new glass-only bin from 1st of July 2021? Now we have all of the following that state they can be recycled. Containers 100% plastic, containers 100% glass with plastic lids, containers part plastic and part glass, i.e. plasticized glass, mostly beer bottles and similar bottles. While we are often told not to put any glass into the recycling bin, as any broken glass contaminates the total load and it must go to landfill, that is an added expense to council. Response from General Manager, Environment and Infrastructure.
Through the Mayor, and thanks for the question. Colac Otway will be transitioning to a 4-bin curbside waste collection model during 2021. During the rollout of the 4th bin for glass, a community education activity series is planned and will be delivered prior to the rollout, as well as the production of promotional material which will inform residents as to what is to be placed in the glass bin and also what can go into the red waste bin. Our goal is to ultimately reduce all contamination within the yellow recycling bin by way of the elimination of glass in this stream. Educational resources which are to be made available for all will accompany the rollout of the purple bin as part of a larger community educational process, which also has the goal of reducing waste that ultimately ends up in landfill.
Question 2, does the Colac Otway Shire Council propose in the 2020-2021 financial year to actually spend any money to improve the Shire's drainage system, or only spend to prepare plans that will not be done until a later time, or do nothing? When major floods in this area are regular on average no more than 10 years apart, as a major road out of Colac has been blocked by flooding at a high point prior to leaving urban Colac due to drains incapable of taking runoff away, while Council has been well aware of poor drainage for years. Response from General Manager, Environment and Infrastructure.
Through the Mayor, in addition to Council's normal drainage maintenance budget, we have a recurrent annual drainage renewal program. In the 2021 financial year, Council will spend $340,000 on the renewal and upgrade of drainage infrastructure across the Shire, which is carried out in addition to minor maintenance and repairs. Council is aware of the increased frequency of localised flooding and considers these factors in the design of the drainage network. A number of roads have been identified in the current and coming years as priorities for design and renewal or upgrade based on the frequency and severity of flooding and the condition of the drainage assets.
Question 3, when will the Colac Otway Shire Council review how it adds surcharges on rates in all commercial industrial areas when the surcharge in the Colac Ilmenite Commercial Industrial is 65% on the base rate, yet in Balance of Shire it is only 55% added to discounted rates charged, when if equal would be at least 150% of the Colac Ilmenite residential rate, that is, full residential rate 100% plus surcharge 65%, less Balance of Shire 15% gives you 150%, not 140% as charged. Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. The question is suggesting the rate in the dollar applied to the commercial industrial Balance of Shire rating category is 150% of the base rate. It is 140% as per the 2021 adopted budget. The rate in the dollar applied to the commercial industrial Balance of Shire rating category is 0.005457, which is 40% higher than the base rate in the dollar, which is 0.003898. The commercial industrial Balance of Shire rate in the dollar is therefore 140% of the base rate in the dollar. The 15% discount referred to is the difference between the two commercial industrial rating categories. This is not a discount. It is simply the difference between the two rates in the dollar referred to when referred to the base rate.
Question 4. What portion of farmers in the Colac Otway Shire who pay the farm rate A receive the discount quoted as a percentage of the rates ruling for rate zone they are in, plus B, what portion of farmers on the farm rate pay over 88% of the rates applicable to the zone the farm is in when the majority of farms are in the 88% plus zone? Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. The rate in the dollar applied to all properties in the farm rating category, being 0.002924, is 75% of the base rate in the dollar, which is 0.003898. Officers are not sure what Mr Judd is referring to with his reference to a discount and the 88%.
Final question from Mr Judd. Has there been any increased usage of Colac Otway Shire Council urban and regional health clinics since mid-2020? Response from General Manager, Development and Community Services.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question, Mr Judd. Access to Council's maternal and child health service remained consistent during 2020. Due to the importance of the service, most parents continued to consult with our clinical staff throughout COVID, although we increased telephone consults during lockdown periods. Now that COVID restrictions have eased, face-to-face consults have returned to full capacity. Group work with parents was the main activity that ceased during COVID, however, this has resumed.
We now move on to questions from Mr. Cutty. Question 1. The administrative introduction to the Councillor Code of Conduct states under community engagement the words "not applicable." My question is why not? Response from Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Mr. Cutty. There is no requirement under the Local Government Act 2020 for community engagement or public consultation to be undertaken in the review of the Councillor Code of Conduct. What is important is the code is developed, agreed and lived by the councillors.
Question 2. Also, who is the Councillor Conduct Officer? It should be noted that the Inspectorate directs breach of code reports back to Council. Response from the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Mr. Cutty. The Councillor Conduct Officer is a person appointed by the Chief Executive Officer to assist Council in implementing its internal arbitration process. Colac Otway Shire's Councillor Conduct Officer is the Manager of Governance and Communications, Marlo Emmett.
Yes. Moving on to questions from the gallery. Can I have a show of hands so I can get an understanding of how many people would like to ask questions? Sorry, I just missed that. We've got Mr. Webber, Mr. Cutty, Mr. Arundel, Mr. Evans, and did I miss anyone? Okay, if we start with you, Mr. Webber. I'd just also note, to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions, I may need to limit the number of questions from each person to 2. Then once everyone has an opportunity to ask their initial questions, and if time permits, I will invite further questions. Please note that whilst we will do our best, it may not be possible to answer all questions without notice tonight. If this is the case, they will be answered later. Before we proceed, I remind everyone in the gallery that you must ask a question. No preamble or introduction to questions will be permitted. If you do not ask a question, you will be asked to sit down and the next person will be invited to ask a question. Thanks, Mr. Webber.
Tony Webber, Otway Forum. Landcare would like to work with the council, this is the Southern Otway Landcare Network, to produce a brochure about Indigenous plants relevant to the person who's just bought land in the area. This could be provided maybe by the real estate agent or from an information service. Would the council consider doing that?
I'd ask Mr. McGann, Environment and Infrastructure, General Manager, to answer that question.
Through the Mayor, and thank you for the very kind offer. Mayor, I think that council officers would be very keen to work with Mr. Webber's group to make that a reality.
Thank you. Now, the other issue we have, as I brought up at the last meeting, is weeds and fire hazards on rural properties. There's been a suggestion that, again, the real estate agents might be obliged to provide people with responsibilities when they buy land and obligations. Now, would the Shire consider that, or working with the state government to bring in a ruling that when people buy rural land, they do understand their obligations with dogs, with weeds and with fire hazards?
So the Chief Executive wishes to answer.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Webber, for the question. Council's in the process of considering a notice of motion being prepared by Councillor Hart, which addresses some of the questions that you're asking, and so I can't give you a response today, but it's certainly a matter that Council will be considering over the course of the next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webber. Mr. Cuddy, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for clarifying the rules in relation to the Government Act. But my understanding is that the Act also says that the spirit of the Act, in fact, that they brought forward is that we go beyond the tick box compliance and that we actually look at more innovative ways of governing. And in that context, and this is mentioned in the supporting documentation to the Act, and especially in relation to community engagement, given that within the code, there are provisions that is going to impact citizens who do raise concerns about breaches of the code, what is the harm in actually getting the people to also to be involved in that? It'll eventually lead to a code where we're not looking at going towards tribunals and inspectorates, but it can be resolved at the local level itself.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Curti, for your question. I think you raised some reasonable points. Council has not had a lot of time to develop its code of conduct, but I believe it has a code of conduct before it here tonight that it is going to give, I think, a very serious consideration to, and the councillors have been involved in its preparation. One of the key recommendations to councillors tonight will be that we review the code at a councillor briefing within 12 months. So the matters that you've raised, we will consider when we review the code in that time.
I have a follow-up question. You can ask 2 questions. Yes.
See, Peter, you're once again stressing this business of compliance. The very spirit of this Act is that we go for things that, be more flexible, that we can do. You can, in fact, wait 3 months and say, look, we will, sorry, let me take a step back. I am aware that you are required to comply and have this code in place by today. And there's no problem with that. You can do that. But you can also say, why don't we go to the people and get to the community and get more input in relation to what they have to say in relation to the code, instead of waiting for 12 months. The 12 months is again going to the old-fashioned, let's be bureaucratic and, the tick box. In 12 months we'll do it. Why not do it right now? There's nothing stopping you from saying, within the next 3 months, we will liaise with the community and have in place processes that would satisfy the public and will be one that is better than, than what we have at the moment. Look, I would hate to think, Peter...
Do you have a question, Mr. Cuddy? Have you got a question for the CEO?
I'll leave it at that.
Do you wish to respond, or...?
Thank you for the statement or the question. Thank you, Mayor. I think there needs to be recognised that small rural shires have faced a considerable impost on their ability to comply with the requirements of the new Local Government Act, and we've worked very diligently over a period of probably 9 months to do the work that would normally take 2 or 3 years in change. I'm also conscious that much of what we've done does not actually produce anything for a ratepayer in our shire, not directly. And so I'm really concerned that we focus on the next 2 or 3 months in ensuring that the projects that this council wishes to undertake are completed or are undertaken and completed. And that is going to be the focus. We need to produce some real outcomes. We've got 3.4 million from the federal government that we need to get on and spend, and that is a strong focus of our organisation over the next few months.
Mr. Evans, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and gentlemen. Last month I lit a match and spoke to you about the entrance signs. And wouldn't one look good on the horrible roundabout out east? I understand that Vic Roads are saying no to you. I think it's about time we get some politicians involved and see if we can get them to say yes. I understand that they're saying that because someone might come through the roundabout and smash it, they might injure their car. Surely insurance would cover that. I believe that this is an urgent program at no cost where near the amount that I believe that you have been advised. Tony McGann has been good enough to arrange a meeting with myself and two very interested others on March the 3rd, which I thank him for. I've also learnt that council owned land at the end of Bruce Street that is big enough to develop 70 housing blocks. So I challenge the council to be brave and, like the council that originally purchased the abattoirs for $750,000. I was disgusted to read in the Herald that you may want to sell that land. Develop them yourselves. Find the engineer that can draw up the plans, negotiate with Barn Water, NBN, Power Corp.
Do you have a question, Mr Evans?
Yeah, I challenge you to develop that piece of land. Are you prepared to be big enough to do that?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr Evans. As I mentioned, Council's got a number of some projects that it needs to work on. This is one of them, how we deal with the Bruce Street land. I guess I've been involved in a number of councils over the years, and one of the things that councils sometimes do well and sometimes don't is land development. And this council needs to seriously consider whether it wants to do it itself or whether it puts some parameters around the development and encourages a private industry to do that. Council will be having those conversations over the next month or so, and where they land I can't predict, but certainly there needs to be serious consideration given to allowing people who are good at doing things to do those things.
Do I still have a shout? Mr Arundel, you had a question? I'll just remind everyone that to ask a question.
Simon Arundel, Bungadore. Democracy does not wait. Free democracy does not wait. Look at the countries around the world. Why is Myanmar in trouble, Mrs. Mayor? Why is it in trouble? Their democracy collapsed. So many countries, they chip away and destroy it. Do you realise this council cannot put off the freedom of councillors to speak up on nearly every issue, perhaps tenders, unless they find they're being misused? They should be free to speak on everything. And if you don't give that freedom to the councillors, do you realise you should never attend an Anzac Day meeting or a Remembrance Day meeting for the rest of your lives?
Do you have a question, Mr.
That
Arundel?
is the question. All right. Do you think you should attend those meetings when you've let down what many of those people thought they were fighting for? I demand that you make a decision today. Do you realise democracy cannot wait? Do you realise it's very simple? Courtesy, to be correct, and there might be one or two things like tenders. Other than that, do you realise that we want to hear from our elected councillors? Because do you realise if we don't hear from them, then we've got no idea what's going through their minds.
Thank
you. Do you realise we won't know who to vote for come the next election? They were all questions. Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm allowed to ask a second question.
Hey, we'll just get a response for that first question.
Oh, yeah, God.
Mr Brown.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the question. I think our views or impressions or interpretations of democracy are wide and varied. This council is about to consider a code of conduct, and that's to some extent, but to a large extent, a self-imposed self-discipline that the councillors wish to impose on each other. So that is a matter for the councillors to determine. They've thought about this for a number of months, and that's what they'll be looking at doing. I don't think I have any other further comments to make.
Do you realise that is completely inaccurate? As long as they are courtesy to each other and accurate, we have the right to hear from them. No excuses. Otherwise, you let down democracy. Do you realise that?
Thank you, Mr Arundel. Have you got a second question?
Yes. Fix the first one, for God's sake, tonight. I had to laugh. Do you realise that? I bought the Colac Herald. It always hurts me. Do you know that? and there's Mr McGann and a couple of people standing on a corner complaining about the traffic. When is this council going to have the guts to come up with a plan to completely rebuild Murray Street? I had a mate for 40 years on the CRB and Vic Road.
Can we answer that question, Mr Arundel?
Yes.
And there's other people that also want to ask questions. So, Mr McGann, can you answer that second question of Mr Arundel's about Murray Street?
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question, Mr Arundel. In terms of rebuilding Murray Street, Council has a strategy that it adopted some years ago called the CBD and Entrances Strategy. Now that strategy has quite detailed plans for Murray Street, including central median and landscaping and undergrounding power and so forth. The construction estimate for that project is quite sizable, and it would run from Corangamite Street through to Armstrong Street. It's one of the projects that Council will be considering for its next, to advocate during the next 4-year term, but there's certainly plans on the books.
Could I have a
Thank
copy?
you, Mr Arundel.
Could I have a copy of all this paperwork so I can see how much thought's really gone into it?
Yes, Mr McGann's nodding. Thank you, Mr Arundel. Are there any other people? I can't see around the corner. Are there any other people with their hands up? We've got a few minutes. Are there any people that would like to ask another question? Mr Arundel, have you got one more question?
Oh, yeah. Murray Street, do you realise, has to be completely built to a grandiose scheme, otherwise people will not stop in this town. Do you realise, even though you build Murray Street into a 4-lane highway, you will still have to put a scratch on a map through a limonite, because the day will come, do you realise, that the traffic, even a new Murray Street, won't handle it. You have to dream. This town hasn't dreamt for 40 years, according to my mate in the CRB. Start to plan. You are frightened of progress.
Thank you, Mr Arundel.
Do you think you'll ever cure yourselves of it?
Are there any other? Mr Evans, do you have another question? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Just one very quick one. Is there any consideration for the council to do some advertising for Colac, promoting the town, doing something about letting the community know that we exist?
Thank you for the question. Mr Surin, General Manager of Development and Community Services.
Thanks, Mayor, and yeah, thanks for the question, Mr Evans. As you're probably aware, Council's had a number of marketing campaigns over the last decade or so. I think campaigns are quite expensive, and they need to be over a number of years, so they need to be sustained. I think last time you were here, you mentioned the Hamilton campaign, and whilst that's a wonderful campaign, in terms of its outcomes, I'd be surprised if it actually attracted people to go and live there. So I think before we invested again in something like that, we would need to understand whether there would actually be outcomes from a campaign like that. But I'd certainly be happy to talk to you further about it.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the open questions, unless there is one more. We've got one more time for one more question, Mr Arundel, and then that will be it for half an hour.
I went round Australia in 92, 93. I only met one person who could remember Colac. Do you realise that? They all remembered Camperdown and the trees and the clock tower. If you want to put Colac on the map, start to dream. Build a road around Lake Colac. Do you realise that? And you'd have thousands of people camping here. It'd be Colac's Wendouree. Colac is a hub to so many areas. Do you realise that? It's the biggest freshwater lake in Victoria, and we've used it as a sewer. Put it to work with caravan, a road around it. You could have high-speed racing, do you realise? Motorbike racing, cycling racing, crawling racing, and Colac would be on the map.
Thank you, Mr Rundle. Is that a question about a road around Lake Colac? Mr McGann, would you like to answer that,
that would
please?
put Colac on the map. You've got to do something.
Mr McGann?
Yeah, through the Mayor, thanks for the question, Mr Arundel. Look, a project like that would certainly be among a range of projects that Council would be able to consider advocating for and the priority of.
Thank you. Then it concludes open question time. We now move on to petitions and letters. Oh, do you need that? Oh. Okay. Well, the CEOs. A petition requesting that Council erect bollards at the north-west end of Sir Avenue, Skeens Creek, has been received from the community. The petition was submitted on 2 forms, contained a total of 76 signatures, representing 58 individuals, as some community members signed both petition forms. A report responding to the petition will be tabled at the Council meeting held on the 24th of March 2021. I'm losing here. Yeah, I know. I might have to get another. Jill, are you there? I just wonder whether I can get this. It seems to be cutting in and out, which is probably difficult for people to hear. I don't know whether, do you think it's gone dead? Okay. Yeah, all right. It might be the connecting to the Wi-Fi. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No? No declarations of interest. I propose that we move to confirm the minutes from the Council meeting held on the 27th of January 2021. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hart. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCracken. Is that to be opposed? No. I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Councillors, now we move to item 10.1, Councillor Code of Conduct. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Oh, Councillor McCracken.
Well, I'm happy for things to be pulled out of this if need be, but having had a very brief discussion with councillors before, there was a move to have the first 4 items heard on block and questions and debate in that same vein, so I'm happy to move that as a procedural motion. Items 1, 4 heard in a block.
Councillor Hart.
But if you want to pull it out, that's fine.
I just wonder if 2, 3 and 4 might be an appropriate block and 1 might be appropriately dealt with.
Councillor McCracken.
I'm fine with that. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Councillor McCracken moves a procedural motion that we hear items 2, 3 and 4 on block. Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. So that's items 2, 3 and 4 will be heard on block. Okay. Councillors, now we move to item 10.1, Councillor Code of Conduct. Do councillors have any questions of officers or any questions? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. My understanding is that we really need to adopt a code of conduct to comply with the Local Government Act this meeting. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, it is, Councillor Hart.
The point 3 of the resolution, according to the agenda, suggests reviewing the code at a councillor briefing within 12 months. I wonder if an earlier timeline would work that might consider the issue of community consultation to any review?
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Yes, look, there isn't an issue. Council can actually review the code at any time it wishes to. So if it wanted to do it earlier than within 12 months, then Council could decide to do that.
So, through you, Madam Mayor, I'm mindful of all the changes with the Local Government Act. If that was 6 months, would that present a problem? So you'd be looking at about the end of August.
The motion actually reads, reviews the code of conduct within 12 months. So there's scope to review it. I just wonder or do you want to make it clearer?
I think that, without entering the debate, some of these things are a bit rushed because of the Act, and I just wonder what could the organisation cope with. 12 months is a long time to have a proper look at it.
Councillors, the organisation is going to have a lot of work to do leading up to September, when you are considering the council plan, the vision, and then enacting budgets and things. I think a 9-month period would be appropriate to do it within the 9 months. That would get us to the end of the calendar year. I do think, though, that councillors have spent considerable time on the code of conduct, and the issue of community engagement has been raised tonight. I would like the opportunity, in the review, it may well be that councillors consider that community engagement is not appropriate, but having the review is important.
The heart.
When you're ready, I'm prepared to move an alternative, which will be along the lines we're discussing.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Hart, you have an alternative motion.
So it would be point 1 and 2 would be as per the recommendation, and point 3 would be reviews the code of conduct with the review to start within 12 months and to consider the opportunity for public input to that review. I'm not sure. That's the gist of what I'm coming up with. Sorry, I meant 9 months.
Does that one work?
Yeah, sure. Reviews the code with the review to start within 9 months and the review to consider the opportunity for public input.
Is that reads properly? I can't turn my neck around that much.
Yeah, I can live with that, thank you.
Is it to be seconded? Councillor Potter, is it to be opposed? Councillor Hart as the mover.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. To be quite candid, I didn't want to be the one that moved this resolution to tonight because I have concerns about the whole code of conduct process that is imposed on us. This code that we are adopting, if we do adopt this resolution, is actually longer than the previous Code of Conduct. We're required to adopt a Code of Conduct, basically. I do make the observation that the code we're adopting tonight, if we adopt it, is what I would say less bad than some of the earlier drafts. I have real concerns about the ability of councillors to make comments about their views on different matters. I think this Code of Conduct has been moderated, so the extent of that isn't as bad as it was in some of the earlier drafts. The reality is there is a whole local government industry that sits on councillors' shoulders. They're not here physically today, but they have a lot of influence over governance requirements, the Act, and documents such as this. They sit on our shoulders through documents like this. When you hear people talking about Code of Conducts, they often think of the worst examples of councillors, and I can think of a council that is currently in administration and a councillor being accused of taking money in envelopes from developers. And none of us think that's appropriate. It's against the Act, but I put it to you, if indeed that's what's happened, and I'm not sure whether it's been through the courts yet, do you really think that such a person would be having regard to the Code of Conduct? And yet they're the extreme examples that people consider when we're having such documents. But the reality is that this Code of Conduct, although a lot better than some of the earlier drafts, in reflecting what's required by the Local Government Act, has a whole lot of tripping points for councillors when they're just trying to be open and transparent and raise their concerns. You can be tripped up by asking some questions of management. You ask too many questions, that can be seen as potentially coming under some of the definitions in the code. You would think from the way of speaking that I'd vote against it. But we're required to have a code. I think if we have a review within 9 months and have that opportunity for community input, that can be managed. But let's not pretend that the industry hasn't managed to sit on our shoulders through the Local Government Act, through documents such as these. And how I put it at times, and I've even said it to the CEO, often as a councillor you've got to walk to the edge of the cliff to try to disclose what's going on. And the challenge as a councillor is don't trip over the edge. And the thing you might trip over is this document, unfortunately.
Councillor Potter was the seconder.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't quite share the cynicism around this code that perhaps Councillor Hart does, but thank him for bringing the motion and for the addition there in point 3. I think it's sensible to review it in 9 months because new council, new code imposed upon us on a short time frame. So I'd like to thank staff and the councillors for the work that they did in this. We did work hard on it. It may not be perfect to all of us, but it's something that we have to have. And the issue around the opportunity for community input, I hadn't really discussed before because this is our code, but I'd certainly be open to looking at that in 9 months' time with councillors and see what they think. But again, thanks to staff, thanks to councillors for all their work, and support the motion because we have to have this done.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor McCracken.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I don't have any particular problem with the change in the 3 months. I don't think that's going to make too big of an issue. And it's been said that that can be accommodated, so that's fine. I guess the point that's being raised is about the ability to speak to the community. And I can't remember the exact page reference, but I think the main thrust of it is that a councillor can respect what decision has been made, but they can express why they voted in a particular way that might have been contrary to a decision, and I certainly intend to take that right if that need arises. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go out saying each councillor, I'm not going to go disparaging them personally, but I think it's certainly quite appropriate for any councillor to give the reasoning behind why they voted a particular way on any particular matter, and for the community to be fully aware of that. And I think it might have been mentioned by one of the questioners before that a community has the right to know what a councillor is thinking and to have those conversations. So I fully agree with openness and transparency and having those discussions, and ultimately being accountable to community who put us in these positions. So if that needs to be explored further within 9 months, then I'm happy to have that discussion with the community's input as well.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? I might just quickly say something. I support Councillor Hart's alternate recommendation. I think it's a good idea, and it's pretty much exactly what we did last term of council, because these things have to be often adopted quite quickly, and when you're new to council, it's sometimes these things can feel a bit rushed, although I don't feel, as an experienced council, I don't feel this one has been as rushed, but what we did last time was we reviewed it sort of 18 months, 2 years down the track, and I very much supported that, and that's why I strongly support Councillor Hart's alternate to review it. It's a working document, and we can review it yearly if we want to. But I think it's a good idea to review it, and it's really following the precedent that was set last term of council. Councillor White.
Thanks, Mayor. I endorse what you're saying, but I would like also to say that I think it's really important that we have a code of conduct and we have an agreed understanding about how we're going to conduct ourselves. We are elected by the community to represent the community, and I think it's really important to have very clear guidelines around that. There's things happening in Canberra at the moment that it really surprised me that there wasn't a code of conduct in some of those areas. So although it's never going to be perfect, and I agree it's great to review it, I think it's really important that we do have a code of conduct to guide us. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hart, would you rather reply? Okay. Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Okay, we're now moving items 10.2, 10.3 and 10.4 on block. I'll ask the officers involved in those items to come up to the desk, and if councillors have questions of officers, if we can ask them sort of separately. So the first one, 10.2, community engagement policy. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. And I apologise for not perhaps clarifying this earlier, but the community engagement policy does talk about, of course, engaging with our community and the various forms that might take and so forth. What I am interested to hear is how we intend to do that with our growing migrant community and people who have language other than English as their first language, and how they are accommodated for in this policy.
Through you, Mayor. One of the guiding principles that has emerged from the Local Government Act is a requirement to make reasonable arrangements for people of all abilities, languages, backgrounds to be able to take part in community engagement. Now that might be providing things in the Otways because we know that their internet isn't great, or it might be providing interpretation services for multicultural community, or it might be making sure that the venues we hold community engagement in are accessible for people in wheelchairs or have hearing loops for people who are hearing impaired. There is a requirement for council to do that, so it's incumbent on the organisation to start putting our minds to the kinds of difficulties our community might have to get involved with our engagement activities and to try to accommodate that where we can.
Councillor White.
Thanks, Mayor. I think in one of the feedback it talked about measuring and monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of community engagement. I'm wondering if you could comment on that, if you've got any thoughts on how you would do that.
So we've got a framework that cascades underneath the policy, which talks about the importance of evaluating our community engagement activities. Now that will differ depending on the level of community engagement that occurs. So for something that is fairly low level, the building of a footpath or the closure of a road, that might be different to a deliberative process whereby there will be some pretty comprehensive evaluation framework built into it around, the experiences of the people who participated, their views of decision making. So it will depend on the level of engagement, but we have in the framework a step-by-step guide that will help the organisation and each officer conducting community engagement to go through an evaluation process. And sorry, I forgot to say through you, Mayor, so apologies for that.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. We had a few submissions to this policy, and I thank the submitters for taking the time and trouble to do that. Could you just explain to us how those submissions were considered and what happened to them, and whether we're going to communicate to those submitters to thank them for their time, and how we dealt with their input?
Through you, Mayor. So we received 5 submissions, all of which were considered. What we've done in the council report is we have précised the key themes of those submissions, and then in a parallel column we've made an officer response. So some of the feedback that we received was, or a lot of it actually, was about the principles and the practices as opposed to the actual policy. So in those cases where there was some comments about our principles or our practices, we explained a little bit more about why council does what it does or how we do what we do. Where the feedback was more focused on potential changes in the policy, we've indicated where we've made that change, and then we've attached the policy with our track changes so submitters can see exactly what changes that we've undertaken to the policy as a result of their feedback. And to answer your question about contacting the submitters, we'll write to each submitter either via email or in writing, depending on the mode we received their submission, and we'll thank them for their submissions and explain how we handled it.
Okay, are there any other questions on that item, 10.2? If not, we'll move on to item 10.3, the Irrawillupi Basin Development, Stage 1. Are there any questions of officers? Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the report attached to this recommendation, there's 2 estimates, which implies the total cost of the project is around $4 million. I'm just wondering how the other part of the project will be funded.
Through you, I've done it again, sorry. Through you, Mayor. Thanks for the question. So you're right. So the there's two components to the project. One is to fix up the basin, treat stormwater and reuse that. The second component is to actually develop the land as public open space. The second component would be possibly funded through developer contributions into the future. So as developers develop the land, they're required to either contribute land as open space or a cash component that could go to the development of the open space area. So things like footpaths and picnic facilities and the like. We'd also be looking to get external funding for something like a playground or picnic facilities. They're often funded by other levels of government such as Sport and Rec Victoria or Regional Development Victoria.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a question around, and probably for the benefit of the gallery more than anyone else, but in respect to the Building Better Regions grant, are you able to outline what the likelihood of actually receiving that roughly $1.2 million would be? And I suppose an extension to that question, and in the same context, would there be any provisions or contingencies such as cash reserves to fully fund the project from the council? And if not, what would happen potentially from there?
So building Better Regions funds is the same with any funding application. There's no guarantee that we will be successful. The way we've approached the Building Better Regions Fund this year is we, in December, approached the regulatory authority that is governing those funds with a number of council projects and listed the and asked their feedback on the alignment of those projects to the objectives of the programme. So which one's more likely to be successful? This is the project that they advise aligns most likely, well to their funding guidelines, which increases the likelihood of it being funded. Saying that, this is expected to be a very competitive funding programme, as it has been in previous years, and Council has been successful in previous years, but not always. So we've done due diligence and we're doing advocacy work to raise the profile of the project pre-application, but saying that there's never a guarantee we will be successful. In terms of your second part of your question, Councillor Bell, around funding, we're asking right now for council approval for 50% of the funds for the project. So if we weren't successful in the funding, we would not be expecting to proceed with the project in the next financial year. We'd have to look at either other funding sources externally or other budgets in the future.
The CEO just wishes to add. Oh, you're fine.
Thank you, Mayor. But I think James or Mr. Meyer has covered it off really well. You'll note in the report that the fund, the BBRF has $100 million available across all of Australia. So it is a very competitive process, and we must appreciate that. But we'll put our best foot forward to try and obtain this funding. And as Mr. Meyer has said, if we don't, then we need to look at other sources and the future budgets.
Councillor McCracken.
Thank you. I note in point 5 there, it requests CEO to look at funding from Victorian Government. What sort of sources of funding are we likely to go for from the Victorian Government as opposed to the federal government program?
Mr. Surin.
Yeah, through the Mayor. Thanks for the question. So this project actually came out of the Colac Integrated Water Management Plan, which is, there's actually a regional integrated water management plan as well, so for the Bowen region, and it's a priority project in that. So that planning work has been led by DELP with support from councils and Bowen Water. So we'd certainly be seeking some funds from DELP. They have had a integrated water management plan program previously. We haven't been successful through that program yet, so we'd be targeting that through the state government. Oh, and sorry, and I'll also add, this would provide benefits for the Colac Racecourse, so we'd be pursuing Race in Victoria as well.
Can I have a follow-up? Are there any other funding sources like RDV or similar that might be looking to contribute or can be chased?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there's a number of benefits for this project. There's environmental benefits, there's social benefits or recreation benefits, but there's significant economic benefits from unlocking land for development. So we'd certainly be looking to RDV for support, or if it's not financial support, asking them to help us get support from other agencies. So yes, absolutely.
Are there any other questions on this item? If not, we'll move on to questions on items 10.4, Community Sport Infrastructure Stimulus Program. Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Could we just have a summary as to how we got here in relation to this particular program, please?
Through the Mayor, thanks for the question. So the state government late last year released a stimulus program for sporting infrastructure that was open to all local governments across the state. Council submitted an application for a combined lighting project. Unfortunately, as you could imagine, it was very, very competitive. The funding ratio is $9 to 1, which is unheard of. So unfortunately, we were unsuccessful. Following that, the state government actually announced a round 2 of that program, and they invited councils to apply, ones that were unsuccessful last time, but that did have good projects or projects that they thought had merit. So we're invited to apply, and hence why we've brought this report back to council.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. There's possibly other football grounds or reserves in need of lighting. They didn't all fit into this category. Could you just give us a brief explanation as to what happened there?
Yeah, thanks, through the Mayor. So when we put the combined lighting project in through round 1, we'd also already applied for 2 other lighting projects, being Birregurra Rec Reserve and Eliminite Rec Reserve. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. So when the state government invited council to reapply for this program, we tried to put those unsuccessful projects into this application, but the state made it quite clear that we couldn't change the scope of our original application, which was obviously really disappointing from our end and probably didn't make a whole lot of sense, but that was the minister's decision. So in regards to those 2 projects that were unsuccessful, there is a funding program coming up. It's just been released actually, that would consider those two projects. So we'll be looking to determine what project we put into another funding program in coming weeks.
Councillor McCracken, you had a question.
No, I'm just happy to flag that I'm happy to move this when questions are done. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor McCracken, you've flagged that you'd move.
I'm happy to move, thank you. Those 3 on block.
Yep, this will be seconded. Councillor Potter, is it to be opposed? Councillor McCracken as the mover.
Thank you. I just quickly want to talk about the Irrawillipi Basin development. That to me is probably one of the most significant projects that will come forward in the future. I think it's pretty well known that there is a housing shortage in Colac. One of the benefits of this project is that it could result in the release of hundreds of blocks for housing development, which would go a long way to tackling the problem. Basically, it's a demand and supply issue. A lot of demand, not much supply. If you had a look in the last 5 years in Colac, property prices have gone up probably higher than the state average, and I know that as someone who's bought a piece of land and built a home in the last 5 years. That's good because it shows that Colac's an area for growth, but there are pains with growing, and we need to do all that we can to ease those pains, and also to make Colac a more livable place. If anyone's, starting out trying to build a house and, build a home and a family, you know, it makes it so unaffordable to create the lifestyle you want to create in a beautiful regional town like Colac when prices keep going up steadily each year. I bought my block probably, 3 years ago for about, I'll use round figures, about 130,000 or so. Equivalent block now is selling for about 170, 180,000. And that's in the space of 2 or 3 years. That's ridiculous. So we have part of the responsibility for that. The more land we can get online and on the market takes away that pressure from the marketplace and hopefully might have a positive result on bringing prices down to make it more attainable for members of our community to build their own house, own their own house and get ahead in life. And we want to encourage that in our community. So this project to me is so important in getting that happening. Not only do we get an environmental outcome with a basin and some recreation space with that, it creates a nice precinct in a growth area which meets all the requirements of the 2050 plan, which was passed a while ago. So I'm really supportive of this project, and I note that this is not the only solution to a housing shortage that we have in Colac, but it is part of the puzzle, and I hope that we can all support this. I'll quickly make comment on the other ones. The community engagement policy makes sense, and the community supports infrastructure program, I hope we can all get behind that too. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Councillor Potter as the seconder.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I too wanted to touch on the Irrawullaby Basin project. This was put in front of councillors or at least 2 years ago, I think, and I'd like to thank Peter Brown and Ian Surin and staff for continuing to put this in front of us. It's a fantastic project for some of the reasons that Councillor McCracken outlined. It will, besides the economic benefits in relation to the stimulus of housing and the residential development, leading to more rates, more people, better spend, support for schools, and all those sort of outcomes when you get an increase in construction and people in the town. It has some great environmental outcomes, and one of which is it will increase the flow of cleaner water into Lake Colac. So we all know the quality of the water in Lake Colac's not real flash at the moment, and we're all concerned about keeping water in Lake Colac. This doesn't solve the problem, but it does help it, and that's a great outcome. Long term, if we get stage 2 developed, the racing club and the golf club will be able to use some of this water, which in turn leaves more water in Deans Creek, again putting water back into Lake Colac. Another great community outcome, and as Councillor McCracken pointed out too, in long term it's going to be a beautiful community space, bird life, smaller mammals, great place to recreate. So well done, officers. Normally I'm a pretty conservative person when it comes to borrowing. I know we're only borrowing it from ourselves in effect, but I support borrowings for a really good project, and this is an excellent project, and I hope all councillors get behind it. I think they will, but yeah, thanks very much.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? No. Councillors, I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Councillors, now we move to item 10.5, Colac Otway Shire Grants Program 2021-22 Guidelines Review. Just wait for the officers to take their seat. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. My question relates to point 2 on the resolution, which is on page 172. It's about the Small Business Environmental Sustainability Program. I just wonder if community groups such as hall committees and the likes are eligible for similar sort of grants as part of this program?
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question, Councillor Hart. In short, yes. So in previous years and in the current year, community groups can apply for environmental projects through categories 1 and 3 of our grants programme. To make sure all community groups are aware of that, we've actually included some information about the types of environmental projects that can be funded in the guidelines this year as part of the updates that we've included. There's a slight difference to what they can apply to what businesses can apply to. As you'll see in the new category 5, businesses can apply for any environmental project that isn't already funded through a state or federal scheme. That restriction isn't there for the community groups. Community groups can apply for any environmental project whatsoever.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. In the recommendation, we're reducing the budget of Category 1 community grants by $20,000 and Category 4 building facade improvement program by $5,000. I just want to be careful that we're not shortchanging community groups and the community in general. Can you just explain for us that that's not what's going to happen if we support this?
Yes, through the Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor Potter. Yes, we don't believe it will shortchange any community groups. Last year isn't probably a great year to use as an example, as we released the funding during the start of COVID lockdown, which means we didn't get anywhere near the applications during round 1 we usually would. We had a total of 94,000 in applications to Category 1, significantly below the 160,000 available. Over the previous 2 years, 1 year has been around the 160,000 limit. The other year has been significantly below as well. And Category 4 has always been a little bit below as well. So we believe there's capacity in those programs to move some funds out. It's important to note that the limits that have been set in the guidelines for the different categories are nominal. They are not exact, and every year there's always a bit of a variation, a give and take between categories. So if there isn't a big uptake in Category 5, then less will be towards that, and if there's some really great projects above what is provisionally allocated to Category 1, then that funding can already be upped, and that will be discussed with councillors once we get the applications in and once we see the weighting and the type of applications we get to each category.
Are there any other questions, officers? Councillor White.
Just through you, Mayor, thank you. I'd just like to say that I'm really glad to see the introduction of a sustainability program grant, environmental sustainability program grant, and it'll be very interesting to see the uptake of that and to see whether or not we might even build on that into the future as it gets interest throughout the community. So I just wanted to say let's watch and see how it goes.
Are there any other questions? Councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCracken, a seconder. Councillor Costin, is it to be opposed? Councillor McCracken is the mover. Councillor Costin is the seconder? No. Does any other councillor wish to speak? No. Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Thank you, officers. Councillors, now we move to item 10.6, Road Management Plan Review. Do councillors have any questions of officers and of Paul Austin, who's joined us? Any questions, councillors? Councillor White.
I think I read in here that there was a recommendation that a response time was brought back from 5 to 2 days, but that recommendation wasn't taken up. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor White. Yes, that was in the time for inspections from the initial customer request through the merit system, the time between that request coming through to when it needs to be inspected. There was a suggestion from the Crow independent audit report that the time be reduced from 5 to 2 days for the primary roads and footpaths. On discussion with our team and with the assets staff here, it was decided that the inspection performance was fine, and we didn't see the need to reduce that inspection time down to 2 days. In other words, we've been complying with 5 days for the last 4 years, and there have been no problems with ensuing problems with defects not being attended to because of that inspection time.
So the community feedback is that that inspection time is adequate and they're satisfied with that inspection time?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Do I have a mover? Councillor Potter, is it to be seconded? Councillor Costin, is it to be opposed? Councillor Potter is the mover.
Thanks, Mayor. Just very briefly, look, the conditioning of roads is a topical one, and we've had not the best results in some of our customer surveys, but we've come a long way with the way we're looking after our roads. I strongly support the work that's gone into the road management plan. I think we're doing good work, and I note that a lot of the roads we get criticised for aren't even ours. So thanks to the officers and consultants for this work. I think we're really heading in the right direction.
Councillor Costin is the seconder.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just well done for all the officers involved. It's great to see long-term planning, forward planning like this, and it's great to see community engagement involved in the preparation of the plan. Thank you.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and I'd also like to acknowledge the officers involved in this particular document, but just highlight that what we're doing today is putting it out for public exhibition for a 6-week period. So I'd encourage the public, if they've got any particular concerns, to have a look at this document and let us know what they think of it in terms of the road management.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Councillors, we might have a short break, just 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to the next item. Thank you. You look like you've run a marathon. Okay, Councillor Potter. Mr Surin, we might take our seats. Ian, ring Mr Evans. That's good, thank you. We'll now move on to item 10.7, review and consolidation of council policies 18.13, live streaming and recording of council meetings, and 18.16, audio recordings of council meetings. Are there any questions of officers? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Two questions. Well, the first one is currently council keeps audio recordings for at least 4 years, and there's a bit of a contradictory point in the draft policy. Is there any problem with council keeping recordings for at least 4 years? Is that an onerous task?
Manager of Governance.
Through you, Mayor. Councillor Hart, no, there isn't. To keep them for 4 years internally is fine.
Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and sort of a similar question. With respect to the live stream recordings being on the internet, is there any problem with, I don't know, internet data or whatever those things are, with council having those recordings on for at least 12 months?
Thank you, Councillor Hart. No, there isn't. What we are proposing to do is to provide a link on the website, which will then move to the YouTube site.
When you're ready, Mayor, I've got an alternative.
Do any other councillors have questions of officers? Councillor Hart, you have an alternative.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe councillors have a copy of it. Essentially, it adopts the policy, but with a change, and the change is just to make sure that the audio recordings are kept for 4 years, and that the live stream is on the internet for at least 12 months. Point 2 and 3 are exactly the same as appears on page 268 of the agenda. So it's just those changes to point 1.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter, is it to be opposed? Councillor Hart as the mover.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This is a great improvement in openness and transparency and builds on an improvement that this council, or the previous council, introduced about 18 months ago, and that was that people could listen to audio recordings of meetings that occurred after the 1st of November 2019. And I note that all councillors at that time supported that, and obviously that means that anyone has any concern or interest about what was discussed for an item and they haven't attended the meeting, they can listen to the audio recording. And that was an improvement on openness and transparency that was introduced in the last council term. And this is another step building on that, and I appreciate the effort of the council officers who have merged a couple of policies, or that's what will happen if we pass this in a moment, and will ensure that the public will now have access in the future to live streaming of council meetings. But I just wanted to ensure that the public recordings continue to be retained for 4 years, which is the case under the current policies, and that the live streaming be on the internet for at least 12 months. And how I understand this policy, if for any reason there is some fault with the live streaming, then the audio recording for that meeting will be available. So this is all about openness and transparency and accountability, and it builds well on what we introduced approximately 18 months ago.
Councillor Potter as the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to thank officers for their work on this as well, and thank Councillor Hart for these couple of little minor amendments, but I think they're important, and I'm pleased to see them here, and I'll be supporting this, of course.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Councillor McCracken.
Thanks. So I spoke to most people around the table, and I think there's a view, if we're happy to move the next 3 items on block, so 8, 9, 10. So I'm happy to move that as procedural, unless there's any objections from
to be
any
seconded? Councillor McCracken? Oh, we don't really know. Not sorry, we don't have to. Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favour? That procedural motion is carried 7-0 to hear items 10.8, 10.9 and 10.10 en bloc. So I'll now call councillor officers up to the desk, up to the microphone, and we'll ask questions on item 10.8 first, the quarterly performance report, October to December 2020. Councillor Hart, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question relates to page 328 of the agenda, which talks about the two-way radio contract. Are these radios currently of use to council? Are they currently being used? Or what are council's plans with these particular radios from that two-way radio contract?
Mr McGann.
Through the Mayor, we are in possession of a large amount of hardware such as radio handsets and so forth. They're not currently being used, but if we do proceed with forming another contract for the provision of a managed radio service, then that hardware will be able to be used.
Are there any other questions of officers? Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 322 of the report, the major initiatives progress report graph looks like it's going to be a big challenge to get to the planned year-to-date outcome. If you'd just like to comment on the graph and give us a bit of an update on that.
Through the Mayor, thanks for the question. Yeah, the graph's not a pretty picture at this stage. We are, as an executive team, got a heavy focus on major initiatives. I just want to point out though, and it's probably not clear in the table, that there's a couple of significant major initiatives in terms of funding that are progressing really well, but there's just not a lot of spend against that. So the City Deal project, lots of work happening, just the spend doesn't reflect that, as well as the Forest Mountain Bike project, which is a $750,000 project. There's no spend against that DELPA managing that project on our behalf. So that does certainly throw the graph out quite significantly.
Are there any other questions of officers on this item? If not, we'll move to item 10.9, authorisation of officers under the Planning and Environment Act 1987. Are there any questions? No. Are there any questions for item 10.10, policy review, acquisition and disposal of council property? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question is, I'd just like us to be clear what we're moving on that particular item, because I believe that the council officers have proposed an alternative. So at the appropriate time, I'd just like it to be crystal clear what we're moving on that one, please.
I believe there is a revised officer recommendation. Is that? Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councillor Hart, the policy I think is sound to go out for for community consultation, save for one issue, that it doesn't address the changes in the Local Government Act 2020, and that what we're proposing is that we amend the policy to take account of those changes insofar as it relates to the community engagement aspects of the policy, and then it is put out for comment. So I think it is a sound recommendation, but needs to be varied slightly.
Councillor McCracken.
I'll just flag I'm happy to move it, and to be clear, the amended officer version of 10.10 when the questions are over.
Any further questions from councillors? Councillor McCracken, you're the mover.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm happy to move it.
Yep. Is it to be seconded? Councillor Hart. Councillor McCracken as the mover. Councillor Hart as the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to draw attention that the policy to do with acquisition and disposal of council property, if this resolution is adopted, is going out for a 6-week period. So I think it's important that the community have a look at that and let us know what they think about that particular policy.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? No. Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried. The item on block is carried 7-0. Thank you, officers. We now move to item 10.11, Notice of Motion Kennet River City Deals Project. Councillor Hart, this is your notice of motion. So, do you wish to speak on it, or just explain it?
Well, I just foreshadow that I've got an alternative which puts, on motion 1, basically puts an end date of 30th of April 2021. And I'm happy to move the two motions together when you're ready for that, Mayor. But if they're going to be opposed, I'd probably like to separate them. But I would like to ask a question of the CEO in due course.
I think you can ask it now if you wish.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mayor. The question of the CEO is, if these resolutions were passed, and I mean the alternative plus motion 2, does the CEO see any significant problem with them in terms of the city deal agreement that has been entered into and the various timelines that have to be met?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't envisage any problems with timelines. It does involve some additional, considerable additional time from the council officers charged with producing all 3 city deal projects. I do think that if we can achieve a greater level of community understanding and I guess agreement with the ultimate project, that'll be to everyone's benefit in both the short, medium, and long term. So we're comfortable with this proposal.
Do any councillors have questions for Councillor Hart or for officers? No. Councillor Hart as the mover, is it to be seconded? Councillor Costin, is it to be opposed? Just Councillor Hart as the mover, and I assume you're moving them together. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and it sounds like this might get through. I think this is a really great project, this city deal project, which is part of a much larger Geelong project, and today we're just talking about Kennet River. I do think there's probably been some progress since the meeting in February early February when I first wrote this particular resolution. But I think the significance of this resolution, if it gets passed, it gives the authority through the CEO to have some extra consultation on the current plan, and it also removes any doubt about the issue of a resolution that was adopted in June 2019. My interpretation of that resolution was that the council did not select a particular option for Kennet River. It identified one that rated more highly, but it didn't select a particular option. There's different views about how constraining that resolution and that report in relation to Kennet River is in terms of the current consultation. What this resolution does is make it clear that if there is any inconsistency in considering the contributions made by the community, I think there was about 190 or so made in the lead up to February, that council management is free, has the shackles removed, and is free to consider all those issues and not feel bound by the June 2019 resolution. I actually don't think they are bound anyway, but the purpose of these resolutions is it removes any doubt. It also ensures that once the consultation's complete and before the council tenders goes out, that councillors are briefed on the proposed design at a briefing, and that would allow councillors to raise any concerns. And whilst I'm not expecting it to happen, if there were any significant concerns, 3 councillors could collectively call a special meeting. I don't think that will be necessary, but it puts a safeguard. And to have the situation where it would require 3 councillors would indicate that there have to be a significant concern that at least a significant number of councillors have. So I think this is a way that management can work with. It doesn't exceed the timelines of the City Deal project because it makes it clear that all these slight points are subject to, at all times, to the City Deal agreement and all those timelines.
Councillor Costin is the seconder.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. This is a motion that the project director wants to see to allow him a bit more flexibility to accommodate what the community wants. So it's a common sense motion, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to support this motion. Very pleased to see it here. I'd like to thank the project manager and his team for at community consultation down at Kennet River for tabling that this is a possibility for councillors to bring to a meeting to allow the flexibility for the project delivery team to incorporate more of the changes that the community would like to see. I caution the community though, they might not get everything they want, I think all of us have had communication with community members, and some councillors more so than others, and some councillors, including myself, have also had contact with the project management team. And I think there's a little way to go, but we are really getting close to being able to dig a hole and start delivering this part of the City Deals project. So thanks for bringing this motion. I hope the community and the project team can sit down, whether that's just a couple from each side, if you want to use those terms, and happy to be party to that as other councillors would be as well. And let's get the drawings out, let's get the texture out, finish off the designs, and get on with delivering this project. So it does bother me, some things I see, the community say that Kennet River's only busy for 6 weeks of the year. Well, that is as it is now, but all this came about because of the masses of tourists that infected the town. They will come back, and this project's about making that easier for the tourists and for the community. The community's had a big win already with stopping the large buses coming to Kennet River. They're well on the way now of working with the project team and finish off the design. That hopefully will be a good compromise for both lots, and as I said, we can deliver this project on time, because if we don't, there's penalties, and we can't afford that to happen. So it's good to see a time frame put on this, and hope we can sit down ASAP and get it done.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? No. Councillors, I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item is carried 7-0. Now we move to item 10.12, Notice of Motion, Municipal Rate Waiver for Apollo Bay Mechanics Institute Hall. Councillor Costin, this is your notice of motion, so over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, this notice of motion is really about applying a bit of common sense to get the best outcome for the community. The Apollo Bay Mechanics Institute Hall is one of the oldest buildings in Apollo Bay. Its history goes back to the 1880s.
Councillor Costin, you're moving it?
Yes.
Is that, I'll just call for a seconder, is it to be seconded? Hang on. Oh, no, I'll just ask for questions. Sorry, I've got confused. Sorry, Councillor Costin. Councillor, does anybody have any questions for Councillor Costin or for officers? Councillor McCracken.
My questions to officers, can you just... I've read the report and I see your reason there. Can you just explain in simple terms why you do not support this notice of motion as it sits?
The reason officers don't support the motion primarily comes down to the hall being used by a private operator, and during that time it is excluded from being used exclusively for by the public. It's a matter of principle, and that's the view that officers have taken.
Councillor Potter.
Mayor, you may not be able to answer this precisely, but for how long has the Shire been calling on the Hall Committee to be paying rates?
Thanks for the question. I'm not sure, but it's been at least for the time of my term at council. I've been here 4 years. I'm sure that it goes back longer than that.
Councillor Potter.
Just a follow-up question to that. Are you aware of any previous representations by the committee to have the rates waived?
Thanks for the question. I believe on occasions in previous years, possibly a committee person or the chairperson of the committee has had discussions with our rates officers regarding the rates. It's been explained previously the reason why it is rateable, and they have paid the rates.
Councillor McCracken, then Councillor Bell.
There's already obviously been a few discussions had, but if, and this is a hypothetical, if they were given perhaps a 12-month waiver due to the situation with COVID, and I understand that the cinema operator wasn't operating within that particular period of time. Would that give enough scope or time for officers to, as part of the rating strategy, to consider this particular instance within the broader scope of the rating strategy that we have to go through? Is that question clear, or?
Look, I don't think the principle would change. The reason for giving the waiver because of COVID is a completely different set of circumstances, and that would be obviously a decision for council to make. But the principle won't change with regards to whether this hall or another hall that is used by a private operator for a longer period of time makes the hall rateable. So that won't change, but the waiver, because of the circumstances during the COVID, during the period of COVID-19, may well be a reason for council to waive the rates, but that's a separate.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. You've spoken of the principle in the context of this particular situation, which I do agree with. And I'm also sympathetic with the current situation as well. I think it is certainly reasonable to ask the question and to put in this particular motion. I guess my question is, if this is passed and if it has a potential to create some sort of precedence, do you see that as potentially undermining the rating system going forward?
Thank you for the question. I think it complicates the system. Whether undermining, I'm not sure that that's the case, but it certainly complicates the system. If you start adding individual items within your rate system, my view is that it absolutely will complicate the system and does set a precedent.
Thank you.
I've got a question for Councillor Costin. I think it's in the report, but or it might have been said. Do you know what sort of money the hall makes for the screening of the movies? I thought I read it. I think it was 9,000. Or I could be wrong.
I don't know. The movie operator apparently operates at cost. He has a sort of joint venture arrangement with the hall committee. They provide the movies together for the benefit of the community. It's not really a profit-making venture. The benefit to the movie the movie operator is that it gives him some advantage over his distribution rights that I don't really understand. But it's an advantage to him whether he runs it at a profit or a loss or whatever. But he's been very generous to the hall committee and very generous to the community.
Councillor Bell and then Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Mayor. Am I able to ask a question of Councillor Costin? Thank you. Councillor Costin, I was just interested, and apologies if it has been reported in the documentation, but are you aware of what the rough throughput for the actual movies would be through that? I think you've mentioned 3-week period over Christmas, then 10-day period over Easter.
In terms of numbers of people?
In terms of people watching films or sitting in the seats or whatever arrangement there is down there?
No, I don't know what the number is. I know they're well attended because it's the time when visitors are there and when when it's not warm down the beach, people go to the movies or they go to the pub. I know that it's enough for the operator to employ 6 locals in part-time jobs, so it's quite important for the economy of Apollo Bay because it's providing that job creation. And also it's very important for the committee itself to get that income from the hire of the hall, because it's a substantial amount for its hall maintenance. And it's a big hall, it's an old hall, it's an historic hall. It could be exempt under Section 169 of the Local Government Act, which exempts historic buildings. So there's probably a case there also. But in terms of numbers of people, I don't know.
Councillor Potter.
Mayor, can I flag an alternative if this motion's not successful, please?
Are there any other questions? Okay, so Councillor Costin's obviously the mover. Is it to be seconded? Councillor Hart, is it to be opposed? Okay, Councillor McCracken. Councillor Costin as the mover.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, as I started to say before, this is really a motion for common sense and to achieve the best outcome for the community. This Mechanics Institute Hall is one of the oldest buildings in Apollo Bay. Its history goes back to the 1880s. It's located on Crown land and it's listed in Council's Historic Buildings Overlay. It had the first library in Apollo Bay and it showed the first silent movies and the first talkie movies for the benefit of the community. But by about 1980, it had fallen into disrepair and it was almost facing demolition. And the local community got up and got a grant from Heritage Victoria, a $100,000 grant, and renovated the hall. And they've transformed it into a vibrant community space that is today. It's used for balls and festivals, bands, recitals, art exhibitions, indoor markets, local and travelling theatre, dance classes, yoga, public meetings, school productions, Anzac Day celebrations, funerals, and of course the movies. In effect, it's the poor man's or the coastal man's equivalent of Copac, except it's run by the community, not by council. It's one of council's 25 public halls, but it's the only public hall, the only one that is required to pay rates. The officer comments say the only reason it pays rates is because they hire the hall out to a private operator to show movies, and it's only showing movies for some 5 weeks of the year. The hall is still available for other purposes. If there was a pressing community need, the committee would, I'm sure, allow the hall to be used for those purposes. The hire of the hall to the movie operator is no different to the private leasing of campgrounds located on Crown lands or the hiring of the foreshore for the Christmas carnival. Yet we're not trying to get those committees of management pay rates. The movies have been a tradition in Apollo Bay for a long time, many, many years. And the Committee of Management do it for 2 reasons. They encourage the movies to be shown. They do that for 2 reasons. It helps to raise revenue, to cover its ever-increasing maintenance costs, and it's an important element of its revenue raising. But they also show the movies because they think it's great benefit for the community. It's much like many metropolitan councils that provide movies for communities over holiday periods. So other councils are paying to provide movies for communities. The movie operator only employs local people. There's around 6 part-time jobs created, I mentioned before. And it just seems nonsensical to me to continue to rate the Committee of Management. Because if the council does charge rates, the Committee of Management can't afford to hold the movies. And if the Committee of Management doesn't hold the movies, council can't legally charge at rates. So that seems a bit like an episode out of Yes Minister, where the cold-hearted, unyielding bureaucracy triumphs over the common sense and those trying to deliver positive outcomes for the community. I believe council should support this notice of motion. It will allow the Committee of Management to provide public entertainment over the holiday period, and it will help it maintain the hall. It would be a great benefit to maintaining the hall. And a rate waiver would be a great good news story for council, a great good news story. It would show that council's got a bit of common sense and is not going to fall back on bureaucratic rules. Thank you.
Councillor Hart as a seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Councillor Costin for bringing this particular resolution. I think in one sense the COVID situation has exacerbated the situation with the leasee and that hall, but it has also highlighted what I think is something of an anomaly. There's various halls throughout Colac Otway Shire. Some of them are owned by council, some of them are owned by the state government department, and as has been pointed out, this is the only one that's paying rates. It's interesting that the issue has been that there's some income coming in, or there is normally, to the particular hall, but I know a lot of halls have various activities, whether it's weddings or classes or musical classes or what have you, that generates revenue, and yet quite correctly they're not being called on to pay rates. In fact, if you've got a hall that's owned by the council's contributing money to maintain it, to insure it, and incurs costs. In one sense, we should be very grateful to the Apollo Bay community, because all those costs are not being borne by the ratepayer. They're not having to pay the maintenance. Council's not paying the maintenance. Council's not paying the insurance. The community's arranging that. And yet we give them the extra burden of rates. It just seems so unfair, and it's an unfairness that we can resolve this evening by supporting the resolution that Councillor Costin has put on the agenda.
Councillor McCracken as the opposer.
Thank you, and I do acknowledge that this is a community service that's quite well attended. I think we're trying to use the wrong tool to solve this matter. This hall is owned by the Victorian Government through the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and it's managed by a committee of management, and quite rightly they take care of maintenance and bookings and whatnot. But I think the difference between what Councillor Hart was talking about with the yoga class and this particular arrangement is that there is a commercial agreement in place, whereas with other arrangements it's more of a, okay, well, this is our fee for hiring the hall for 2 hours, it might be $20. So there's a commercial arrangement that's in place, and that, based on my understanding, is the trigger for it to be rateable. I understand that there might be another alternative put forward, which I don't want to steal your thunder, but I think that might be a better way forward, so we can sort out some of these matters as opposed to giving, in effect, a blank cheque into the future. We don't know how long this arrangement might last. Based on the motion, it's going to last, well, it doesn't have an end date. The whole point about comparing this to a caravan park is that, if a caravan park is on Crown land, like the OCC, they don't pay rates. That's because it's not a commercial agreement. If it was leased to a private operator, they would be perfectly rateable, and it's even said that in the council report. So I do see it as quite rightly that if there's some sort of commercial agreement, that they are liable to pay rates, and that's the rating system. I don't argue that it's a perfect system, and in some ways I argue that it's almost not a perfect system. But to overcomplicate it by making exemptions for particular groups based on individual circumstances, I don't think that's the way you build a comprehensive system and you maintain it. I'll be the first to say that rating system is not a good system, but I don't think complicating it in this particular manner is appropriate. Much to say that I'm terribly sympathetic towards the Hall Committee and their need to maintain the hall to a standard that is appropriate for the community and to allow them to provide options to have cinemas and shows there. But I think there are other ways of doing that as aside from the rating system. So I think this is the wrong tool to use to get an outcome.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'm very sympathetic to the whole committee in relation to this. I am concerned about the open-endedness of this motion, however, and given the discussion councillors have, I would like the opportunity to have more time to explore some of the issues here. I mean, it's not the committee of management that are running the movies, it's a private operator. And the private operator chose not to do that over this Christmas, thereby not providing the money to the hall committee, although the hall committee unfortunately have had to incur the rates. There's no guarantee that this operator will come back next Christmas, in which case, in the absence of any other commercial arrangement the hall committee might make, it's no longer a commercial venture. They won't pay rates anyway. So I would have rather preferred councillors to waive the rates for the 2021 period, have a further discussion and assessment of the situation, whether that's through the rating strategy or just separately in relation to this issue and these particular circumstances. And let's see what happens next summer.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor White.
Like 2 bobs worth. I'm just from what the information Councillor Costin has provided. I think the community should be congratulated for taking on the hall when they did and getting it back to a usable and much loved hall by the sounds of things, and used really well for a whole range of different activities. I understand the difference between a business activity and a community activity, but I think we have the discretion and flexibility to enable communities to thrive and grow, and things like movies I think are really important to communities. And it seems like as a councillor I want to be an enabler, and I think we're over-engineering it, and I don't want to be a blocker because we get bogged down in it. I think the point that Councillor Hart made, that it actually doesn't cost Colac Otway Shire anything at this point in time, whereas all the other halls do in insurances and maintenance and all the other things that go with maintaining 26 halls across the Shire. I think that's a really important point, that it actually isn't costing us anything. And I guess that, although I agree with you, Joe, that it's probably not the best instrument to resolve this problem and enable the committee to continue to grow and thrive and look after the hall through whatever revenue that they can raise, it's probably not the best way to do it, but it's what we've got in front of us at the moment. So, I want to support it, and I want to see that community have access to the movies and to continue to thrive and have that social interaction and entertainment.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Costin, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The notice of motion is open-ended because it's trying to correct an injustice. So it's not about a COVID year or the next couple of years. It's about correcting something which is fundamentally wrong, fundamentally broken. The private operator didn't really choose not to hold movies this year. He couldn't afford to pay the hire because the hire rate had to include the rate fee in it. So he couldn't afford to do it. As Councillor White pointed out, other halls are costing us money. I don't know how much we're spending to fix up the hall at Warrior. This hall, this Mechanics Institute hall, is well used by the community, and it's not costing council a cent. In fact, we're wanting to charge the community for being such good managers of this hall. The OCC matter and the lease of its campgrounds, sorry, but it's not quite the right interpretation. The OCC has leased out its campgrounds up until the 1st of December this year. It's done that for many years to private operators. The Kennet River, the Skeens Creek campground and the Maringo campground were operated under a private lease arrangement with OCC. Now Gorkappa's chosen to end those leases. But we didn't charge OCC rates. Exactly the same arrangement. I'd sort of look at, we were talking about grants before, council's grant programs, and I was looking at, there were grants for community groups, there were grants for businesses. I don't think that the Hall Committee would be eligible to apply for a grant as a business, yet we want to rate them as a business. They're a struggling committee. COVID has exposed this problem. There's no doubt about that. But the committee's been struggling for some time. They've got their annual general meeting coming up next week, and they're struggling to get people even to come to the meeting at the moment because it's just getting too hard,
Time, Councillor Costin.
Thank you.
Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The item is carried. All three. Come on, say it. Division. The division is called. All those in favour? Councillor Costin, Councillor White, Councillor Hart, Councillor Potter, Councillor Hanson. All those against? Councillor McCracken, Councillor Bell. Now we move to item 10.13, report of informal meetings of councillors. Please note that this item is to report the informal meetings of councillors and does not require a council decision. Thank you, councillors. That concludes this ordinary council meeting of the Colac Otway Shire. I declare this meeting closed.